Jack it up.
The Clown in the Woods by T.B. Anarchy. Jimmy, Brian, and Keith took a walk behind Jimmy's house one afternoon after school the way they had done so many times before. Jimmy was 13 while Brian and Keith were 12. All three boys attended junior high together. They had been best friends since the 4th grade. They walked and talked about school, superheroes, and girls, the way they always did. All of a sudden, Brian pointed in front of him and said, "Hey, who's that over there?" Jimmy and Keith stopped walking and looked over to where Brian was pointing at. There they saw a man walking in the woods off in the distance, which they felt was unusual since they were normally the only ones walking out there. The boys just stood and stared at the man. He was tall, about 6 feet or so, and was quite slender. His gray hoodie was obscuring his face, so they were unable to see what he looked like. All three boys were standing very still as they kept watching this man walking down the woods. Then all of a sudden, Keith stepped forward and stepped on a branch that was laying on the ground, which made a loud cracking sound. Jimmy and Brian gasped as they glared back at Keith as if he had done something really wrong. They looked back to see the man had stopped walking and just stood there for a moment. Then he slowly turned his head in the boys' direction, but instead of seeing a face, they saw the man was wearing this creepy clown mask. The man in the clown mask slowly turned around, and they saw he was holding something in his right hand. It was an axe that had blood dripping off the blade. The man in the clown mask stood and stared at the three boys and vice versa. "Everyone just be quiet and don't make any sudden movements, and maybe he'll just go away," Jimmy whispered to Brian and Keith without looking at them. No such luck. The man howled like some wild animal as he started charging towards the boys. Jimmy then yelled at Brian and Keith without looking at them, "Run." All three boys scattered and ran as fast as their legs could take him as the man got closer and closer to them. Jimmy ran off in one direction while Brian and Keith ran off in the opposite direction. By separating, Jimmy hoped this would confuse the man and he would stop pursuing them, but when he looked back, he saw to his dismay that the man had zeroed in on him as if he was his target all along. Jimmy kept running through the woods and didn't stop, as the branches kept slapping him in the face as if they were trying to help the man catch up to him. Jimmy kept on running, hoping he could find anywhere to hide from the axe-wielding clown, but then he tripped over a small log and fell face first on the ground. He spat out the dirt and the leaves that had gotten into his mouth as he turned over on his back. He yelled out in terror as he saw the man hovering over him, swinging his axe back and forth beside him. "Who are you?" Jimmy yelled at the mask. "What do you want from me?" Tears were nearly forming in his eyes as he waited for any response from the man as he continued to stand over him. Instead, he only heard heavy breathing coming from his mask, making him sound like Darth Vader from Star Wars. Jimmy tried to crawl away from the man, but he stepped on his chest to prevent that from happening. Jimmy watched in horror as the man slowly raised his bloody axe above his head. "No, please don't," Jimmy pleaded with him, shaking his head. When he saw his pleas were having no effect, he raised his arm in front of his face and waited for the inevitable. Then all of a sudden, Jimmy heard what sounded like rocks striking the ground around him. He lowered his hand and gazed around to see Brian and Keith standing behind the man and pelting him with rocks. "Leave him alone, you creepy clown bastard," yelled Keith as he and Brian kept throwing rocks at him. Again, the man growled like some sort of wild animal as he turned his attention towards Brian and Keith, thus giving Jimmy the opportunity to crawl away from him. While the masked clown was distracted, Jimmy picked up the log he had tripped over and shouted, "Hey!" When the clown turned around, he swung the log at his face and managed to strike the side of his head. The man fell down on the ground where he laid there motionless. All three boys looked down at him when Keith asked, Is he dead? To which Jimmy replied, I don't know, and I don't want to stick around and find out. The three boys all ran back to Jimmy's house. They never told another living soul about what had happened, including their parents, for fear of everyone thinking they were crazy. And they never went in the woods behind Jimmy's house again. This next story is called Can't Believe My Life. And this is by someone named Jenny. I was walking down the hall of Secret Middle School. I couldn't believe my luck. I had just become the volleyball captain. I was going to practice when this boy just tripped right over me. I was like, hey dude, but he just ignored me. So I was thinking how rude he was and showed up for practice. We were pretty good, but then on the way home, I saw this clown giving out balloons. I was like, cool, free stuff. But the thing is, clowns are really creepy. If you're not afraid of clowns, you're like the bravest person I know, because like everyone should be afraid of them. But anyway, back to the story. So I nervously took a balloon. After that, I totally went home. So we ate my totes' favorite food, pizza. Then watched my totes' fave show, Blind House Murder. So after that, I totally went to bed. The next day at school was kind of weird, because the clown guy was there for the opening speech. I was like, okay, but that's not even half the scary part. He went to every one of my classes. It felt as though he was stalking me, but that night he followed me home. I started screaming and ran all the way home. I looked out the window and saw the clown, then saw another turn the corner, then another, then another. I ran out of the house and to my friends, still screaming. I rushed in and found the entire family was clowns. I ran out there fast, then I started to realize I was the only human left in the world. I hid for hours. And though what seemed like every clown in the world was forming a circle around me, then the circle was getting smaller and smaller. Right before they got to me, I woke up. Sweetie, you look scared. Is everything all right? It was my mom. I screamed. She was a clown. I looked down and I realized I was a clown too. And this final story is called Lucy's Past. Lucy used to be a normal girl. That is, until they got to her. Lucy was on her way home from school, a normal day, as you would call it. She had just passed the twisted oak tree by her friend's house when she saw a shadow creeping out from behind it. She looked but saw nothing there, so she continued walking, but she began to grow worried as she heard footsteps behind her yet again. When she turned, there was nothing there, so she continued on her journey walking faster than before, trying to outrun the eerie feeling within her. But as the wind began to whistle and rain began to pour, she had to pick up a quick sprint. Leaves twirled around her feet as she ran, and the wind pushed her hair back. She was enjoying the run until she looked behind her. Right behind her, next to the twisted oak tree, stood a clown. One with a creepy smile that seemed to be carved into his pale face. Lucy tried to scream, but no sound came out, and soon the clown was walking right to her. She tried to run, but her feet were planted in place. She couldn't move. She was paralyzed. She took in ragged breaths as the clown approached her. He now stood right in front of her, looking into her eyes. And when he spoke, shivers went down Lucy's spine. Forever you must stay with us. You must be our queen, the clown said, his eyes never once leaving Lucy's. She felt like she was being hypnotized. She felt as though she had to do what whatever he wanted. So she followed him into the darkness of the forest, leaving behind her world. A few days later, Lucy's friend Alex went looking for her. He has been looking since the day she went missing, but the only thing he was ever able to find was her backpack that was left at the entrance of the woods. I hope you all enjoyed. I am Dr. See You in Your Dreams, and yes, I will see you in your dreams tonight. Sleep tight.